me, as per, with a rambly one. It's about a week before Christmas. I think it actually is exactly a week. I've had quite a good week in the terms of good conversations with people. Like people I haven't spoken to in a while. It's tricky when you sort of know you all have your own lives and you don't speak to people every day. You sort of realise when you do speak to them, you really cherish those conversations, because they are sort of like, they are obviously their moments, but I don't know, for me they definitely do sort of lift me. I'm going to do a video. It's sort of a continuation, I guess, of my first one. It's sort of, I've got a list, obviously I'm reading off it. The idea of maintaining creativity, but not making art and being okay with it. This is very much a state I have been in on and off. I mean, I'm drawing definitely more than I was since I first left, which, you know, is always progress. But when you're someone who is sort of like, oh my God, I'm not doing it every day, what am I doing? It's, this, you know, because it was, at uni it's part of a routine. And for me, it's always been part of my routine and my sort of mentality. But my routine's changed, so I haven't been doing it. So I have been sort of setting myself small, what did I call it? Small goals, or little steps is what I call it. Just to sort of keep, for me at the moment, that's sort of even just drawing, not daily, because that's putting too much pressure on myself, but old me would have been like, oh my God, I have to draw. And if I don't, I'm a failure. But I was talking to someone the other day, and she was talking about how she started drawing again, and just sort of picking up a pencil and keeping a sketchbook for yourself, and actually letting that be the reason why you're doing it, to sort of have a level of how do I describe this? Keeping it up for yourself. It's interesting. I've always kept like little sketchbooks, but I'm someone who sort of like, I have many on the go, which is indicative of how I think and sort of am, i.e. a bit of a mess. But I think I've got like little sketchbooks. I make people little sketchbooks as well, because I think it's sort of a good way to document stuff. But going back to the drawing thing, this idea of sort of keeping up a skill, we were talking about how sort of, well, for me in particular, if I don't draw, I get scared I'll sort of never be able to do it again. But that's also like, I'm someone who sort of, it goes back to the momentum thing I was talking about a couple of videos ago. If I don't draw, I won't draw. Which is okay, but then when I want to draw, you know, when the energy does come, I do find it more difficult. Some ways I've sort of been tackling that is to change it up with media. So I've been doing a lot of stuff, oil pastels. I found a couple of artists I liked online who were sort of, I used to draw with them a lot actually, but it's just nice to go back to something which you used to feel quite confident with, and there's no pressure there. But going back to this idea of sort of keeping up and maintaining a skill, I am very much someone who falls into the trap of relying on Instagram for validation with my work. So like, you know, I make work and I post it, but I read a really interesting article the other day actually. It was about sort of this idea of generation of artists, but being able to use the platform to make a living for themselves. And that's something I've got commissions and sold work for Instagram and Facebook, but there's not a level of sort of something which is consistent, and I think that's it's not what I'm missing, but it's that interesting balance of doing it because you love it, and then, oh yeah, taking the next step to actually, I want to monetize this / make it a bit of my income, especially as, you know, when you don't have an income, unemployed. But yeah, that's something I've always thought about. But the article was really interesting because it was about how people get sucked into this idea of making work and posting it, and then sort of not getting the response they want, or sort of relying on that, and through that losing a sense of why they were making it themselves, why they were making the work in the first place. It is a trap I do fall into sometimes. And I think it's also important because no one really talks about that sort of thing, so this article was really interesting. I'm going to try and find it and I'll link it below, because it was quite refreshing to talk about, to see that spoken about or written about. Something else which is always difficult when you're not going at the same pace as you usually do is this idea of comparison. I've always been quite good because I guess I was always doing, but last couple of weeks it's been quite interesting just because, I don't know, social media is a really interesting one because it is sort of that idea of you are being, people are opening up about their lives, whether that be sort of, whether they are using it to share their art, or I just mean sort of, you know, daily, I guess people like vloggers, so YouTubers, that's sort of a different space, but still an interesting one, because, you know, people sort of, you know, the whole idea of sharing the best bits and stuff, but I find it interesting how people present themselves online, and how that idea perhaps is elevated through how they curate themselves. I am someone who, to be honest, I don't really care about that sort of thing. I like to document, so I'm very much, ooh, cool, post. Whereas I have nothing, I don't not curate accounts at all. I just think it's how that's perceived by the viewer, and what that can do to someone. But Instagram's also, you know, Instagram is good and bad. It's a double-edged sword, especially for a creative where you're using it to get yourself out there to connect with people, but also when you're not making, when you are sort of, you know, a bit stuck perhaps, you know, in a block or something, and you're like, oh my god. So it's so important to remember to sort of detach yourself from that and take a step back, which is what I'm learning actually, and continuing to learn, is this idea of pace and slowing down, which is difficult for me. Slowing down has made me take a step back and reflect upon what I have actually done, and actually give myself, you know, a pat on the back, which, well, I'm not very good at. This was a bit of a rambly one, but I think at the moment I'm learning to maintain some sense of routine, because if I don't have that, I do get sucked into the state of woe, we'll call it, and not really seeing clearly. But yeah, just slowly drawing, slowly doing, and looking forward, I guess. Yeah, looking forward, not looking back, but remembering that it's okay to go sideways.